is the most perfect, imperfect character that was ever created, in not only Avatar, but in any form of media ever. For you see, I've potentially rewatched Avatar about 15 times at this point, and over the course of my time as an Avatar fan, I have finally come to truly understand and see why it is that I and many of you continue to return to this series. It's because of the last Airbender himself, Avatar Aang. This incredibly genius and well-written character can be credited with almost all of the success that the Avatar franchise has received. But why is that? Why is Aang so relatable and beloved by all of us fans? Well, today I'm going to attempt to do a deep dive and explain all that makes Aang the perfect example of maturity and growth. And potentially, by the end of this video, you will all share a deeper appreciation for a character that I'm sure you already love. So without wasting any more of your time, let's dive right into today's character analysis. Starting off with what actually makes a main character good, and what makes some bland, boring, and hated. For you see, in countless series, even outside of anime, manga, and cartoons, we have seen many examples of the self-insert character trait. This trait can be seen most used in series where the target audience is children or young adults. It's a trait that gives you, as the viewer, the chance to make this character that may come across as a copy and paste copy of another into one that you can then self-insert into and become. An example of this can be seen with kids dressing up and pretending to be Power Rangers or the Avengers. They take on the traits of characters like Spider-Man and become influenced by them, their selflessness and heroism. This trait at times came across as lazy protagonist writing, but it's actually more often than not intentional by the authors. Because over the history of television and writing a character in general, we have found that this is beyond one of the most desired character traits of all. Like, why do you think bland, boring characters like Kirito become so popular? It's because despite how awful that show may be, in my opinion, it allows you to wish to become him, running around in a game world and leveling up with your friends. And you see, Aang is also a perfect example of this form of writing. He functions as a positive role model for not only me, but for also you. You grow up wishing to become him, at least to some extent. But it is also important to note, however, that this form of writing does lead to characters becoming too perfect too fast, with characters like Tanjiro from Demon Slayer being the perfect example. He, in a matter of a few seasons, becomes a walking perfection, and honestly incredibly boring to watch. After some time, you no longer wish to see or even become someone like him. He isn't relatable to you at all. That is a poor example of the self-insert character. Because like I said, you need a relatable character that you want to become to have any success in your series. Which is what leads us to the next important thing, that a character needs to be well-rounded and actually good. They need to be like you and like me. They need imperfections. They need to be taught lessons along the way to allow them to grow. For you see, we need to witness a level of growth from a character that is us, because at that point it opens us up to the potential growth that they have also received. This is also why shows like Avatar, Invincible, and even Harry Potter become so popular, because all of these shows follow the popular coming-of-age storyline. A storyline that is beyond rinsed at this point, but somehow still remains incredibly unique and interesting. It's a storyline that relates to you, me, and almost every single person on the face of the earth, because we all have to come of age to achieve the goals that we have set forth. Now yes, unlike Harry Potter, which took place over the course of a few years, Avatar, or more specifically Aang's journey to end the 100-year war, happens in just a few months. So how can it still be considered a coming-of-age story? Well, that's the very unique aspect of Avatar as a series, because it's a story that by using themes like past lives and spirits, allows you to witness Aang in his many forms and ages. Whether that be the fun-loving and innocent kid, the mature and wise monk, or the stressed out and decaying old man. In the course of just a few months, you bear witness as Aang not only ages upwards himself, but you also get to witness what awaits him in his later years. Because although every avatar is shaped by the struggles of their times, they all tend to reflect one another in many ways. But explaining that entire aspect would require an entirely different video than this one. One that I may actually make one day very soon, so subscribe so as not to miss it. But back to this video. The point is that as we age and return to Avatar, we find that the characters that we once loved have changed, or at least our perspective of them has changed as a whole. For example, when I watched Avatar as a kid, I thought Azula was just a kinda hot, scary sister to Zuko. But when I rewatch it now as an adult, I feel very sorry for her and almost pity her in many ways. Because you see, my perspective of her and the entire show as a whole has aged along with me. And this is a big reason as to why Avatar is so good and easy to watch, because it allows for your appreciation for every character and every event to evolve with you also. Every time you watch it, it really feels like you're watching it for the first time, because what you take from each character's story is different every single time. This applies to almost every single character in the series, with one of the most talked about ones being Uncle Iroh. Like when I was a boy, I saw him as nothing more than the fun-loving uncle to Zuko. But later, as a man, I see all the characteristics of what it truly means to be at peace with oneself. He's the true image of maturity and non-toxic masculinity. And this most definitely also applies to Aang himself. For in the early years, his running away and abandonment of the air nomads can easily be seen as selfish and idiotic. But when looking at it from another, more mature perspective, it's seen as a very understandable and relatable character choice. For I believe that almost every single one of us has had a situation that isn't all that different from Aang. Now sure, we're not stopping wars or bending elements, but we've most definitely had a moment where we felt like we had the weight of the world in our hands. And in my experience with this kind of situation, all I wanted to do was run away or just not bother with it in the first place. So seeing a kid that hasn't even gone through puberty yet, running away from the responsibilities that he did not ask for or desire, is immensely relatable and understandable. And it's also because of this moment that his character would even more become like you and me. Because after he awoke to find that he was alone and the air nomads were no more, he would go through an offset of emotions and regrets. Constantly thinking that if he was there, then maybe someone would have survived. Or maybe if he was never born, then someone more deserving could have been the Avatar and not him. He suffers from immense insecurity, regret, and imposter syndrome. And his story, aside from being one about ending a war, becomes one about growing to forgive oneself from the mistakes that you made in the past. Something that we all, to some extent, are trying to do in our day-to-day lives. And it should also be noted that being the Avatar comes with some inherent loneliness. A loneliness that no one around you could ever really understand. And for Aang, this was apparent in even the early days as a monk. He used to have lots of friends in the air temple that he used to play with all the time, but after being revealed as the Avatar, they stopped playing with him because of his power. And even in the Netflix live action, we learned that although it seemed like he never needed any training to become stronger, he actually required more training than most in just learning how to hold back his strength. And then later, with the reveals of one of Avatar's most important episodes titled The Storm, we really begin to understand Aang's perspective in all of this. Because in that episode, he explains all that we have already mentioned, but also touches on the pressures and expectations that being the Avatar presents. He has to not only master 4 entirely different elements, but also stop a 100-year-long war in just a few months. And throughout all of it, he is constantly being told that his past lives could have done it, and done it better. It's really not all that different than a perspective of a king becoming the new king of a kingdom. He not only inherits all the enemies of old, but also the expectations that he should be as good, if not better, than his father that came before. It really is an immense amount of pressure for one so young. But now honestly, there are an absurd amount of things that I could point out about the responsibilities and traumas that come with being the Avatar. But that would make this video very long-winded and 2 hours long. So let's just move on to why Aang is a flawed but very perfect character. Now, like we've already mentioned throughout this video, Aang is childish, insecure, scared, and in many ways traumatized by everything that happened to him and his people during the 100-year-long war. He is filled with uncertainties and immense doubt in his potential as the Avatar. But on the flip side of all of this, he can easily be seen as a prodigy in many ways, and almost comes across as perfect. So while it's interesting to look at Aang's many sides and dive into how the annihilation affected him and made him into the man that he is today, I still think it's important to point out how imperfect this fun-loving, free-spirited boy can actually be. Because while this version of him is by far the most flawed and immature, it's still the most enjoyable and warm side of all. For in Avatar, we see a lot of very sad and deep moments that would most likely break your heart. But then, almost as quick as it is broken, it is then put back together with some of the most random and whimsical stories and adventures. Like Aang dressing up as an old man, or him trying to use a fortune teller to see if Katara fancies him. These little and ultimately pointless storylines are some of the most perfect episodes in the entirety of the series. Because for a moment, Aang and us as the viewers get to take a break from the bigger war and experience life as a child. For we must remember that aside from all his responsibilities, he is still just a 12-year-old boy. Like yes, Aang is an imperfect and childish avatar. He is completely different than the likes of Kyoshi. But that's what makes him my personal favorite avatar. Because I too am imperfect, I too have flaws, and I personally find the way that I can relate to him and how he eventually becomes better and arguably more perfect than any other avatar to be inspiring, and ultimately the reason I keep coming back. Like after witnessing the life story of Avatar Aang and seeing his personal growth, you too will see endless potential for yourself. Because sure, he's filled with character flaws, but which of us isn't? We all have things that we feel are impossible to accomplish, titles that we feel are impossible to ever achieve. But Aang, at the young age of 12, ended a war against the Fire Nation, got the girl of his dreams, and lived happily ever after. So why can't you or I do the same? Why can't we achieve our goals and pull the hottie that we've had our eyes on for a while now? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because you haven't subscribed to this channel. She can tell just by looking at you that you're an average watcher and not a subscriber. So subscribe now and get the girl, because she's waiting for you to do so. But jokes aside, that's going to do it for this video on why Aang is a flawed but absolutely perfect character. If you enjoyed and want to see other videos like this where I dive into other Avatar characters, then tell me down below which character you'd like me to do next. But with that, I'm out. Have a great rest of your day, and peace.